Hello and welcome to Analysing Avatar. Today we are taking a look at Zuko Alone, the 7th episode, I checked this time, of Book 2. And I'm joined as always by the late Airbender himself, the guy who just couldn't get into the show. It's season 2, Chris. I haven't had a chance to mock you about that yet. We've 7 episodes in. This is the first time I'm bringing it up. I'm very disappointed with myself. Chris Billingham himself, how you doing, buddy?
Yeah, I'm good, man. You?
Yeah, I am. I'm good. I'm excited. I enjoyed this episode. This is one of those episodes that is really, really good, but I'm always mildly disappointed because it interrupts the toughness. And that is not the episode's fault.
No. Before we delve into it, though, did you just to finish a thread? And I wasn't going to bring it up. I was going to see if you naturally discovered it. But have you checked the Dropbox folder yet?
I haven't. No. Have you have you named last week's episode as AA for Avatar The Last Airbender? Dear Lord, season 2, episode 6, The Blind Bandit. Oh my God, this title goes on forever. Blind Bandit audio for Chris Billingham.
I wasn't gonna. The problem is, I wasn't gonna draw your attention to it, but then I didn't want you to look at it down the road and forget, because we're a bit ahead, and be like, "What the fuck is he doing?"
I edit everything sort of in 2-week chunks now, so there's a chance I'd have at least balanced the audio, blended the audio files, and done the mix down this week. But the likeliest scenario is that I would have done it next weekend. So I think I would have remembered a week later, though. I hope my memory isn't that bad, but that is hilarious. AA for Avatar The Last Airbender, season 2, episode 6, The Blind Bandit audio for Chris Billingham. That is the longest file title I've ever seen. For those who don't remember, or if this is your first episode of this podcast, last week I was sort of making fun of Chris for his unusual titling of the audio files that he sends me when we record these. Anyway, we're here with Zuko Alone. It is a big episode, and I do think it is a brilliant episode. So I have to just acknowledge right up top that that slight it's a shame to introduce Toph and then immediately go elsewhere. It's really not this episode's fault. It's just an ordering thing. You put this episode one episode before or an episode or two later in the run, not a problem. So I'm saying that now to express that is a feeling I often have when I get to this episode, and then I'm saying let's not worry about that because it's not a valid criticism of this 22 minutes of television. It's more of a criticism of the order in which they were released, and that's not the episode's fault necessarily, right?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, because I'll be honest with you, I didn't even really notice, and I think that's because we watched one yesterday and watched one the very next day,
right?
Or today, as it's known.
You had
so
you had your fill of Toph yesterday, and you didn't mind the diversion.
I didn't even really think about it, whereas I did think before watching the episode, I wonder if we're going to explore Toph. Also, of course, the episode's really good. And There's a lot to I think this is, whilst last week's episode is probably better, this episode I think is the most thought-provoking episode of the series, all series, as in of series 2 for me. And we can talk about why, but it was just it's almost binge watching, isn't it? When it's the very next day. So I just these 22 minutes aren't about Toph, okay? Whereas I think if we'd have had last week's and then weren't recording for a week, I'd have spent the week going, we're going to see some Toph, and then, see
You'd
Toph.
have felt that disappointment.
We don't see Toph. Yeah. But then again also, Dan, nothing will ever be as crushing as the follow-up to the 4-part Lars stuff with Steven Universe being followed by, I can't even remember what it was followed by.
Yeah, so it was the big Wanted arc, and then it was a Mayor Dewey episode.
Yeah.
It was called Dewey Wins.
That was it.
And it's infamous as an episode of Steven Universe. For those who don't know, don't listen or watch Steven Universe or our podcast Steven University, there was a big gap between the Wanted arc, which is this very, very big mythology-heavy, game-changing 4-episode arc, and then they had this episode that was just, there was a big wait, and not the production's fault at all, but there was a big gap between airing of the final episode of the Wanted arc, which I think was called Lars's Head, I think it was in like May, and then Dewey Wins aired in like November, and the fans had waited so long for the follow up to that brilliant arc, and it was such a fun but frivolous episode, and it really the disappointment was palpable amongst fans, and we got to experience a mini version of that on our podcast, Steven University, which
definitely. I just had to shut the door. By the way, apologies if that was loud.
That's all right.
No, absolutely. So, do you want to let's recap and then let's delve in?
Yeah. So, well, I'll start by just explaining the plot of the episode, then I'll explain what happens in the flashback, so I don't have to keep cutting back and forth. So, in the current day plot, Zuko finds himself in an Earth Kingdom town where, because all the soldiers are out fighting the war, they're left protected by basically whoever was left, which is a bunch of lousy thugs that are basically abusing their power, taking people's food, bullying the town, and Zuko comes across this kid who throws an egg at those guys and nearly gets in trouble, but Zuko kind of protects him and lies and says it wasn't him. The kid ends up taking him back to his house where he meets the family, who are the most... I love the kid has got so many questions. The questions you should be asking a stranger you're letting into your home. And the parents are like, a man's past is his business. No, they say variants on that like 4 times. They're the nicest people, but also they are asking to be robbed. Is what they are asking to be. Anyway, different story. Basically, he hangs out with them for a little bit, sort of like talks to the kid, learns that the kid... I think he sees a little of himself in that young boy who's struggling because his older brother is one of the people out fighting the war, and the kid tries to borrow his blades to learn, and there's this really nice teaching moment where Zuko shows him how to do it, but then he's like, well, I've got to move on, I'm a nomad, I'm the man with no name, I'm like proper Western style, riding off into the sunset on his ostrich horse. And he doesn't get too far before it turns out that those guys he ran into come back and basically kidnap that kid. So he's asked to go back and help the kid. And in the course of that, reveals his true identity. And then that family want nothing to do with him. And he tries to give this kid the knife, which we'll come back to in a second when we talk about the flashback stuff, that meant a lot to Zuko, and he doesn't want it anymore. He's an outcast from the Fire Nation, and he's not really particularly wanted in the Earth Nation, in the Earth Kingdom. Sorry. So that's the present day story. The backstory is we look at the reign of the end of the reign of Fire Lord Azulon, who it seems may have passed in pretty weird and suspicious circumstances. Basically, we get a few flashbacks to young Zuko playing with Azula, and we get baby May, and Azula and Ty Lee. And basically, it's we just get some hints that Ozai, Zuko's father, who is displeased with Zuko, is looking to sort of get himself to be next in line, even though next in line should be Iroh. Iroh suffers a loss we were not previously aware of. And that's the reason his siege of Ba Sing Se, his 100-day siege or whatever it was of Ba Sing Se, ended, which is new information. And then the Fire Lord Azulon passes, and mysteriously his dying wish was for his second son to take the Fire Lord crown, not his first. Which again, who and where did that come from? Is that real? Did somebody just... Was he murdered in his sleep and they were like, that's definitely what he said? It's a little bit unclear, but it basically, the whole thing goes to show Zuko's rather unusual upbringing. He seems much softer than Azula, but he's also obviously been brought up through some very harsh times, and and then his mother vanishes, which is obviously a potential big influence as well. So yeah, I think I've summed it up terribly. That's longer than I've done a sum up in a long time, but there's a lot to get through this episode, so I'm going to blame it on that and not my own inability to speak coherently. So that's the episode. Thoughts, Chris? Where do you want to start?
I think, well, like I said, so I think, well, let's go to the let's put aside the bread and go straight to the meat. This is a sentence I've never said before. I think the thought-provoking thing is what happened to Grampy Fire Dude.
Yes.
Because it's like the their mother apologizes and said, whatever I did it for the
protect
best
you.
to him. To
Yeah,
protect
I wrote
him.
that line down. The exact line is, everything I've done to protect you.
So I'm like, maybe sister Fire Dudette, what's her name?
Azula.
Maybe Azula was telling the truth, and she killed him to protect Zuko, to stop Zuko having to die. She killed him.
Sure.
Maybe she didn't, and he did. He killed his father so he could take the reins. Because it kind of feels like the sister knows what's going on at the end with the evil smirk. Maybe they were in it. Maybe the deal was right. We'll kill him together, but then you go. Assume, because I kind of got the vibe that she disappeared after that. Then again, actually, the episode doesn't specifically tell me that. I don't think, does it?
I think they do. I think Zuko's where's mother, and I think basically Azula says that she's.
Oh
dead.
yeah. He goes up to him crying. Yeah. So yeah, they do that, and then she's not in the funeral scene. Correct. So I'm hoping she's out.
And her scene with Zuko, where she's like, everything I've done to protect you, then she sweeps off into the night, like, does feel like a goodbye. So I think your what's the word I'm looking for? Your inclination is smart, because you're looking at how she left and putting it together with the events.
No, I'd forgotten as well when she overtly says she's gone, and then he goes to speak to Fire Dude in like the garden, and he doesn't reply. So I'm sorry, Lord Fire Dude. So it's the Grandpa Fire Dude is Azulon. Which, if you're wondering, they actually say Azula was named after him, which is why their names are so similar. And then there's Ozai, which is Zuko's father. Right. Yeah, so,
and he's obviously brother to Iroh.
It feels more like Ozai, and how did they then get him to commit to it being him, not Iroh? How did they even do that? Like, it was the most like it's super suspicious, right? It's like, ooh, what's happening? Yeah, I mean, it's definitely suspicious, and I don't know. I quite like the notion that maybe she did it to protect Zuko, but then it becomes. I feel like his dad, his Fire Lord, is also in on it. So I think it was incredibly, like I say, just incredibly intriguing and thought-provoking. And the more I talk, the more it's clear I don't have any ideas for it. And I thought maybe, like, I think what's the problem here, Dan, is I watched the episode, I chatted to Jess for 5 minutes, and then you and I talked about Seinfeld for half an hour. And now all my thoughts on the episode are just gone because we talked about Seinfeld before we started recording for literally half an hour. So yes, I
had a great time chatting about Seinfeld. Should we do that?
Oh yeah, it was a wonderful time. Fun was had by all. Yeah. But I think the main thing is, where does his mother fit into what happened?
Right.
And to protect him. That's the bit that intrigues me.
Without her sort of running off in the night with pretty cryptic last words and then vanishing, the whole thing would be, you'd feel like it was fairly clear. You'd basically go, Ozai has basically murdered his grandfather and told everyone. He definitely said the last thing he said was that, that he wanted me to take the crown. So can we just get the crown thing sorted, and then we'll worry about the rest later. Logistics. Oh, grandfather's dead. I'm very sad. You'd basically, that's what you would assume happened. But between Azula's implication that Azulon had maybe suggested that because Ozai didn't respect his brother had lost a son, maybe he should lose his son. That feels weirdly authentic for a child to have made. Do you know what I mean? That's a very specific. Do you know what I mean? Logic. And I just feel like, even though Azula is very cunning, there's a part of me that wonders, Azula always lies. Maybe she didn't lie about that. So I guess, but without the mother element of this plot, if she just was there at the end, I don't think this would have anywhere near the same intrigue, because you would just assume that's what happened, I think. And you'd feel quite content with that. But the missing mother angle, and what exactly transpired that night is. It gives it a whole new dimension of intrigue that it didn't previously had, and I think it does improve the episode even because it doesn't seem as clean cut as it might have. And while clean cut is always neat and tidy, I'm always up for a bit of a mystery.
Yeah, and I feel like this is because I think one of the reasons there's not a lot of theorizing in this podcast compared to Steven University or even over analysing the Garden Wall is there's not really a lot to theorize about in a way. Do you know what I mean? I feel like this is the first out and out what's happening here that we've had in a while.
Yeah, it's like the plot progresses in front of you. It's not as much about what's the wider world. All the characters know the wider circumstances. We know the goals. We know the where it's going. You've got to assume that this is coming down to Aang and the Fire Lord, right? Like you know what I mean. The show has laid its path out in front of you, and now it's just enjoy the ride. He's going to learn. The book's called Earth. What do you think he's going to be doing this series? Like, you know what I mean? Like it's not a show with as many where does it go questions surrounding its narrative. It has a really clear path from minute one.
Yeah, completely, and like you say, it's mapped out. We're building to Aang and the Fire Lord, and as I think I'm gonna try and call it from now on, that pesky comet, which is still there. But exactly that pesky comet or that fucking comet is a ticking clock, not a mystery box. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not a what's behind what's in the what's in the prison in whatever that series was of Doctor Who.
Yeah,
it's you know what I mean.
You're exactly. That's the perfect way to describe it. It's a ticking clock, not a mystery box, and that is true of the show in general. The Fire Nation took. We know the last remaining vestiges of the old world are the Northern Water Tribe, Ba Sing Se with its grand walls, which we'll talk about in a minute because that's related to the Iroh plot, and which we've not really properly seen yet. And then Omashu, which we now know has fallen to the Fire Nation. So the whole show is a ticking clock because it's the Fire Nation on the verge of world domination and Aang requiring to achieve... it's Harry going out after the Horcruxes, not to bring it back to Harry Potter, but he has his goal. Before he can face the Fire Lord, he needs to master all the elements, and he knows that. So, the ticking clock is a perfect way to describe the entire show, because it's not even just the comet. It's just the Fire Nation on the precipice of victory the whole time, and that's fascinating. There is so little of the world Aang left behind left now. Everywhere seems to have been heavily affected by the Fire Nation. The big cities, the big locations. There's only a couple of them still standing. In the way of the Fire Nation's rule. I think there's a different thrust to this series than I think a lot of the other shows we've reviewed. Because when you look at the shows we've done these kind of podcasts for, where we review it episode by episode, Fringe and Steven Universe and Over the Garden Wall, they've all been mystery box shows. Well. What was that, sorry?
Even Infinity Train, like the whole premise of Infinity Train,
right?
Is what's going on the train?
Exactly, yeah. So this is the first show where the plot hasn't derived excitement from where's it going, what's next. You don't know what's around the corner. This is a show that goes, no, here's what the show is. Now we go on the ride and we enjoy it every week, which I guess is why it's not really the sort of show that you're going to watch an episode and go, oh, well, what's this? What's that? I'm going to theorize about that. This episode does introduce an element of mystery that the show hasn't previously had, but even that still feels secondary to the major thrusts. It's not something I'm going to be waiting every week, what's the answer? What's the explanation? Because it's not that kind of show. It's never pretended to be either. And I do think that's been interesting, because I don't think I realized it was that kind of show when we started doing these podcasts. It's as this has gone on that I've realized.
No, but also, if who's the girl in the mystery dress that he sees in the swamp is anything to go by, we're going to find out next week anyway. So
yeah. Yeah. So it is definitely a very intriguing plot for sure.
Yeah, I loved it. I was really taken by it, and also all the way they did it as well. Like, one thing I really loved is like it's like the show's going, and I really believe they knew all along they were going to introduce a sister, but I love it.
Yes, she's in a much earlier of season one, a much earlier episode of season one before she's introduced in the background. When they do
as
Zuko's
as discussed last time,
Agni Kai. Oh, we talked about it. Okay, my bad.
Yeah, she's in the crowd during a fight, isn't she? Yeah,
she's in the crowd, looking very pleased that her brother is being burned by her father. It's when you watch it back, knowing who it is, it's twisted. It's really quite up. It's unnerving.
But I love, because so often, in shows like this and other shows, well, look at spoilers for trailers. Look at the current Fast 9 trailer, F9 trailer, where it's just like, oh, he's got a brother, has he? That just hasn't really ever been mentioned in 8 movies.
Yeah, and his brother is like some sort of crazy super soldier, master thief, something or other. And it's like, so wait, so while he was boosting DVDs and DVD players and selling those when he was like, he was proper underachieving compared to his brother.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then they're like, you've always lived in Dom's shadow, and it's like, has he? Because
it very much feels the opposite. yeah.
So like, shows do that all the time, and I just love the scene where they had the funeral, and it was like, right, we're going to fucking name every character in this family now. So that it felt like they were going, right, we can't go, what about this other sister?
Right.
Because we're literally naming.
There's another brother you didn't know about we're going to introduce next year.
Yeah. It really made me laugh. It was like they were going, right, we're planting a flag, and this is the flag.
And here's the family, and don't worry about any secret siblings showing up next year. Yeah, I agreed. Yeah.
So I got a real kick out of that scene. But in general, seeing them interact, seeing how they grew up, and I loved as well. So all of that stuff, great.
Yes.
But then all of the current day stuff was fantastic. The parallels with the boy, where they love him, but when they find out he's Fire Nation, even though he unleashed fire to protect the town and protect that boy in particular, they still outcast him.
Yes.
But one compliment I want to pay before I forget is I really loved in the opening few scenes, they animated him to look really weak. Like, they made him look, to my eye, maybe I'm wrong, they made him look thinner. They made him look gaunt. Like, it's a real attention to detail that a lot of animated shows wouldn't bother going to. Like, but they made him look tired. They made him look worn down. And I just thought that was what a stunning depth to go to. Because it would just be so easy to just pull the character and just plonk them in. But, there was the shots of him holding his belly and like his face just looked thinner and gaunt and tired and hungry. And I thought that was a really nice attention to detail.
I don't really know how they did it. I would love to compare the models to see if he is thinner, because I also got that, you get that impression, but it wouldn't even surprise me to discover that he's not physically thinner. They've just angled it in ways to make him appear that way, or maybe his movements gave that impression, because you're right, you absolutely get that from it, but I physically don't know how they achieved that. I don't know if he is actually thinner, like they told the animators, we're going to change the model this week and he is going to be a little bit sort of frailer in appearance, to start with, at least, or if it's the exact same model they always use, but thanks to the the voice acting selling it and the movements of the character selling it, like holding his stomach, that sort of stuff, you just buy it, right? Like, it could be either. It wouldn't neither of those explanations would surprise me, basically. So yeah, I don't know. It's very interesting that you pointed that out, because I also spotted that, but I physically am not sure how they achieved it. It is very impressive, though.
It's brilliant.
I think the episode does a lot for the character as well, in both times. I think it's really interesting to see young Zuko's personality, even when we're not getting the intrigue with the flashbacks. We're getting a lot of, like, he does have a kinder nature than his sister, and his sister is basically a demon child, and it's really... They really do a lot to sell that. So the two scenes that always stick out to me is the one where he says, "This is how Azula feeds the turtle ducks," and he throws a rock at one. And it's like, wow, like he's learned that from his sister. He's obviously softer, kinder, but he's trying to be tough and respected like his sister. So he's copying her, which is tragic in itself. And even more tragic in the scene in front of Fire Lord Azulon later on, when he's like, "I want to show what I've learned," and he falls on his butt. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the way they characterize him in this is, you definitely understand why he's such a conflicted character so often, because he really does seem to have picked up his mother's kinder nature, and it seems like Azula picked up her father's, evil. I don't know how else to describe it.
The bit that got me for that was the very opening scene when he's about to pull his knife out and attack, and then he realizes the woman's pregnant.
Yes.
And it's just like, there's just this real humanity there.
Yes.
That we don't get. What's fascinating, and again, it's just the depths and the thinking that you can pull into this episode, because you feel like we've had hints of that, but we've not seen it as overtly as that. And it's like, well, he's always been in front of someone trying to impress them. As much as he loves his uncle and stuff, I think he's still trying to look tough and powerful in front of his uncle. I mean, think about how many of his early scenes were him pulling weight and being like, "No, we're doing this," and da-da-da-da-da, and all of that sort of stuff. Whereas when he's on his own, it's just like the humanity just shines through, because he's not trying to impress anyone.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Without the pressures of expectation from the Fire Nation, his behavior shifts. And that is... We see versions of that in both. This is what I was sort of saying about how this episode does a tremendous amount for his character, both in the flashbacks and the present-day stuff, and the parallels it draws between the two are mighty. It's just very interesting to see that he has got that nature in him, and then to see it in his mother and her protective nature of him, because regardless of what physically happened, it's very clear that whatever she did it for his good, for his own good, for Zuko's good. I don't feel like she'd have maybe done the same for Azula, who at one point she literally says the sentence, and I wrote this down, "What is wrong with that girl?"
Yeah. That was amusing.
I mean, what is wrong with that girl, Chris? That's my question.
Oh, I don't know. She's
insane.
I did love seeing the three girls younger, though. I got a real kick out of, like, they're showing them friends and a bit of a gang in the young days.
Yeah, and they even did the little hint of Zuko and Mai as well.
Yeah, exactly. I thought that was all really sweet.
Yeah, it was. So yeah, I think
you got to assume it's what you said. He was so close to his mother. She was more in awe of her father.
Yeah, absolutely. They've each taken after a parent to a certain degree, and of course, then you've got Zuko obviously being influenced by Iroh. So we should probably talk about the Iroh of it all now, because this is another amazing element of this episode. It's amazing how this episode makes you feel for Iroh without ever putting him on screen. Well, once putting him on screen, actually, sorry, but before the tragedy strikes, we see him.
But even then, that's not a scene with him in a way. It's a visual representation of the letter.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, was that a surprise to you? Because we've heard in the past about Iroh, besieging Ba Sing Se for many, for a huge amount of time. I always forget how long they say they were there for, like 1,000 days, 3 years or something. I can't remember. It was a long time.
Yeah,
and then they talked about his failure at Ba Sing Se being one of the reasons he fell out of favor within the Fire Nation. And they've very someone even said to him, oh, you're the coward who like bowed out of the siege of Ba Sing Se, and he said, my men were tired. We'd been there 3 years. They missed their families. He kind of brushed it off as I was doing it for the good of my men. We weren't getting anywhere, and they were getting tireder by the day. It was more like almost like part his compassion and part practicality, part just the realistic prospect of taking this city when we're this tired is not great, so we backed out of it, which feels very Iroh. And then you learn in this episode the truth, which is that he had a son. It was his only son, Luton, who was or Luten, I think they pronounced it, who was on the front lines with him at Ba Sing Se, and perished. And then they describe Iroh as having fallen apart after that and retreating. It's an extremely insightful thing to learn about Iroh, but it's also a deeply sad thing to learn for Iroh. Someone so compassionate losing a son, clearly young, to a war that you don't even necessarily know how committed to Iroh was. Maybe that was one of Ozai's fears about Iroh taking over the position of Fire Lord. So I don't know. What did you think to all that? Basically, it's a very long way of me asking that question.
Yeah, I thought it was fascinating. I thought it, like you say, it adds a lot of depth, adds a lot of heart to the character, and also for me, again, another example of so many things in this episode just spinning off threads and thoughts. It made me go, well, that's another layer to his relationship with Zuko. Like, yes. It's almost like he has kind of adopted him as a son as well, and whether that's partly a way of dealing with his grief of losing his biological son, who knows? Probably, it seems a reasonable guess. And again, the show doesn't overtly state that, but it's all there in the text. When you I imagine if we went back now and rewatched series 1, a lot of it I think would play quite differently now.
Yeah.
And that's awesome. It adds such tragedy to the character.
And completely reinforms his relationship with Zuko.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, so agreed. I love that.
Yeah, I agree that the relationship with Zuko thing does when you watch it back, and it's always interesting because this show is very rewatchable. Like I rewatch this basically every couple of years, and I'd rewatched it all with Nadia a couple of months before we started doing this, and I'm not really feeling that I just saw this. You know what I mean? Because it's such a great show, and Nadia is also now rewatching it too. She's gotten ahead of us. She's just started season 3, but she only watched it 6 months ago, and she's already going back through it. It's an immensely rewatchable show, and that is one of the reasons. Characters act in ways that you go, well, that's really clever because that's establishing their character, their personality, and then you find out about events in their past that inform that behavior. And this happens for a lot of the characters in this show. Aang's initial desire to play and ride the polar bear whatevers and the giant fish and do all the fun stuff, you later learn is because he shirked his responsibility and was still doing that. And then we get to the Storm episode where we learn that he'd run away from his responsibility of the Avatar, and that is what he'd been doing in early season 1. The same thing. He hadn't learnt that lesson yet. And there's other stuff we learn later about some of the other characters that informs how they behave, and we learned about Sokka as well. We learned about when we first met Sokka, he seemed one way, but once we learned about the way his father sort of left him in charge of the tribe, you realize why he's become such this big brother character. This sometimes often very funny, but also quite wise as a leader. As somebody who's giving them direction.
He's very strategic. He's very strategic with his. In a military sense.
Yes. And you learn that before you realise the backstory that informs that. And I think that's just a really smart way to write characters. They're consistent, and you like them, and then you find out why they are the way they are. And that just really always rings very strongly. And I think the Iroh one is probably one of the strongest, because there is very much, when you go back and rewatch it, that fatherly sort of tone between him and Zuko that it plays very differently on a rewatch for sure. So yeah, it's one of my favorite elements of this episode is learning that truth, which is really, yeah.
Yeah, completely agree. What other sort of general notes have you got?
Let's have a look. What do we think to Zuko's? Well, first of all, the fight is amazing. By the way, there's a big fight at the end with the Earth Kingdom sort of temporary soldier guys, and I love this idea of the guy earthbending and doing it in conjunction with these hammers. Just a really cool visual, just a really awesome sort of baddie of the week sort character. Perfect for this sort of episode, and it leads to the moment that I was about to ask you about. How did you feel about Zuko sort of like choosing to firebend and reveal it? Because if he just firebended, you'd be like, oh, it was self-defense. He just, in the moment, he turned to firebending. But he firebends and then literally, like, proclaims himself. I am Zuko, son of Fire Lord, blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, what's the...
It's the flashback, isn't it? So one, I loved that he wasn't using fire. Like, that to me said a lot about the character, that he wasn't. He had this ace card. I love how, especially when, like, to make the sister look tougher, they've had to make him look weaker. And like as you referenced earlier, we have that scene in the flashback where he tries to impress and falls on his face. Like, and fundamentally, he didn't manage to capture the Avatar last year. We've had a lot of Zuko looking weaker or less skilled in combat. So I really loved that, like, we showed him basically defeating 6 or whatever it was earthbenders without even having to resort to firebending. But then, and it felt like maybe he was doing that deliberately in part to kind of protect their impression of him, maybe. And then obviously you have the flashback, like, as he's knocked out, of his mother saying, never be afraid to be yourself.
Yeah, I think one of the things she says to him is like, you're someone who keeps fighting even though it's hard. So I was just giving you that one of the quotes I wrote down. Sorry, Karen.
Yeah, no, that's fair, and that's kind of, I think it's going to be hard for him to reveal himself because he knows he's going to disappoint these people that he is trying to protect, but he listens to his mother and chooses to do it. And I think it's a great scene, and also it kind of I like the thread of is Zuko going to turn out to be a good guy, and in the end I think the lines will be more blurred than that. I think it again not to be typical us, but it will be Draco and Harry more than he outright turns. I think that would be my inkling. But he probably does something which protects Aang in some way or something. But I love that we're not. It feels like every time we go like him, training with the boy or protecting the pregnant lady, you kind of go, oh, okay, we're seeing him change, and then it's like, nope, badass fire dude ranting about my hair and my role and swirling with fire around me, and even that last shot, which looks beautiful, of the kind of orange sunset or sunrise, whichever it is, and him walking away into it. It just, I love that, like, if we're gonna get there, we're gonna get there slowly, and there's gonna be a lot of nuance on the way there. And I think that's great.
Yeah, I think it's incredible. And again, this is another one of those, it's so consistent moments where you learn something here that informs a previous conversation. So in the Siege of the North Part 2, the last episode of the previous season, Zuko says to, I think, Katara, I've always had to struggle and fight, and that's made me strong. It's made me who I am. And when you look at...
He says that to Aang, doesn't he, in the cave, in the siege?
Oh, maybe it is to Aang. Yeah, you're right.
While Aang's knocked out.
You know what? You're exactly right. That's exactly where he says it. Yeah, it's not during the Katara fight. It's when he's got Aang in the cave. And when you think of that sentence in the context of this episode, when his mother told him, you're someone who keeps fighting even though it's hard. That's who you are. And then that, even the dagger, which I've forgotten the exact translation, but it says something similar. It's that famous Denzel Washington speech, isn't it, from when he won the award? Fall down 7 times, get up 8. It's Zuko understands where his strength comes from here, and you're right. He made a choice to throw himself under the bus to save that family because he knew it was the right thing to do, even though it would be hard for him. It was the right thing for them, and the fact that they didn't appreciate it in the end is perfect, because that is just another way the world is kicking Zuko. Like, and another way was showing how much the rest of the world hates the Fire Nation as well. It's doing a lot in a short 20-minute space, to be honest with you, this episode.
Just to discuss it quickly before Triv, or kind of any other quick fire thoughts from you, to be provocative, if that's the word. Do you think, and again, this is as we often do, this is a provocative question for the sake of it, as opposed to my opinion. Do you think that having him fall flat on his face when trying to impress his granddad and showing very little skill contradicts the kind of badass he's been in the past? Or do you think actually, because my interpretation is that actually it shows that, as his mother says, he has to work incredibly hard to be that badass. And again, I think if you rewatch series 1 in context, you see a lot of training shots. You see a lot of him working on things, and he's not naturally gifted like his sister. He has to work at it.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, if you do go back to season 1 and maybe one day you will go back and take a look at the series, with hindsight rather than the first time viewing like this. But you're absolutely exactly right. The very first time we, see him with,
haven't we with Legend of Korra? We're doing this till we're like 40 years old, aren't we?
I think we worked out that we were going to be doing this till like 2025 or something like that.
It was so late that Dan showed me the schedule, and I was like it went so far into the future that Dan showed me the schedule, and I was like, yeah, it looks good. And Dan was like, yeah, it'd be great if we can keep to it. And I was like, yeah, hopefully we will. I said, I mean, obviously it'll be a little bit difficult if either of us has a child or anything. And you could tell that Dan was like, oh, fucking hell, I hadn't even thought of that, but you're right. This goes so far into the future that it's perfectly conceivable.
I think I've got us doing the last episode of Korra. Here we go. The 2nd of April, 2024.
Right. Anyway, yeah. So you were I sort of gave the provocative, but also then gave the answer you'd have given to it. Which
you've exactly right. You hit the nail on the head. There is plenty of training shots. There's a lot of him and Iroh training, and there's also a lot of implications of him progressing across that season as well. There are like episodes where he's Iroh's teaching him stuff that he then uses. So he's become a competent fighter and a badass across this series. He's almost, on his training journey the way Aang is, that again, more parallels between those two characters. So other quick notes very quickly before we get to the Triv. I loved that Missoula called him his royalty-loving kookiness. That's the best possible way to describe Iroh. I enjoyed that. Just excellent. I also like that, as well as him choosing not to steal from the couple with the pregnant lady, him defending that kid by telling them, he didn't know who threw the egg immediately in the episode. I think that's like, it's the same thing, but like just reinforces the idea. I thought that was nice as well. It happens almost immediately after.
Kind of, but also I think that's I interpreted that a little bit as he's just grumpy and pissed off and hungry and can't be asked to deal.
Yeah, well, yeah, because I did write in my notes, I was a little bit surprised he didn't choose to fight those guys there and then when they stole his grain, but I think you're right.
Yeah,
I
think the kid then latches onto him, but actually it wasn't so much about saving the kid.
Yeah, he was just too tired to bother with these guys. Yeah.
Yeah, and just didn't want to give them the satisfaction. It's more about not wanting them to enjoy attacking the kid than protecting the kid.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
I think you're exactly right. I've already talked about the guy with the using his earthbending in combination with a hammer. I also like that when Zuko uses his firebending, it's in combination with his swords, which I don't think we've seen him do thus far. I like this idea of like combo attacks where it's like you've got a weapon and you're bending and you're sort of putting them together. Like that guy using his hammer to sort of give extra force to the rocks he's shooting instead of just his earthbending. I think that is really awesome. I do love that. I think that's all the notes I have there. Everything else we've kind of covered. Yeah, we have. Okay, so let's do the Triv.
Yeah, man.
It's time for trivia. So when Zuko...
Trivia it up!
You now officially need to do that every week.
I'll try, but it's very hard to remember the running jokes.
Yeah, it is. As judged by the fact it took us like 3 episodes to correctly assign the that earthbending child from Return to Omashu to our Knobhead Hall of Fame.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been watching Infinity Train for weeks and just blagging that I've watched the Avatar episodes because we go to do a podcast. I'm like, I don't even know anymore what I'm meant to be watching. All right.
So when Zuko beats the Earthbender and reveals his identity, a man in the crowd shouts that Zuko's own father burned him. However, in the storm, it's implied that this fact was not that publicly known. Zuko's own crew didn't know the story, and Iroh repeats it to them. So there's a couple of potential explanations for this.
Can I give a suggestion before you read official wiki explanations?
Well, there isn't an official... I'll tell you right now, there isn't an official explanation for it, so it's speculative. It's fansplaining. But yeah...
My fansplain, personally, would be that... and it's just, theorising... would be that since he's been outcast properly, since he's properly banished, he's cut his hair, etc., they've gone... Well, fuck it. Let's start telling people and let's spread this around.
Right. Yeah, that. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. The other potential explanation is propaganda within the Fire Nation meant that they didn't tell people that the Fire Lord burnt his own son.
Right. But
that
doesn't mean other people didn't know.
But either way, you're absolutely right. Like that is a very good explanation, which is just that now he's been properly banished. The story is, been thrown about as an explanation for, also to help them catch him. I guess he's got this scar. This is where he got it from. That makes sense too. I think both explanations fit.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Avatar
I think my explanation's better. No, I'm joking.
Avatar Extras stated that this episode is the series equivalent of a Western, which I was going to talk about earlier, but we just got distracted by all the excitement of this very, very good episode. It's full of Western tropes. That man with no name traveling from town to town, getting into a duel in the middle of the small town to save a family. That are being bullied by local thugs, criminals, outlaws almost. It's and then him riding off into the sunset on his horse with his hat tipped. It's Western top to bottom. It does have a lot of those tropes. So it is yet another episode in this season with a sort of vibe of another genre. I don't know if you picked up on that or not.
No, I didn't. I didn't watching it, but now that you say it, I'm like, yeah, absolutely. That's great.
Yeah, particularly that last shot off into the sunset is very Western.
Yeah,
but yeah, I do enjoy that about this episode. The doll given to Azula, that was sporting the latest fashions from the Earth Kingdom, has a hairstyle and headband very similar to Toph's, and obviously a colour scheme quite similar to Toph's, although the outfit is quite different. But just sort of nice little detail that Earth Kingdom sort of fashions have evolved, but there's still an element from the older fashions that have transferred through into today. Yeah, I enjoyed that. Obviously, the Azula's game of shooting an apple off another's head with firebending is very similar to the marksmanship feat known as the apple shot, most famously performed by William Tell. That's obviously a very famous thing to do, shoot an apple off a thing, off a head. The fact that Daggerse is made in the Earth...
We've been so... After banging on about genre, I can't believe it's taken the trip to go, and I can't believe I didn't notice that, to be like, yeah, no, this one's a Western.
Yeah, in my head when we started talking about it, I was going to bring it up right up top. It was going to be one of my first questions for you, but we just got straight into the sort of mystery element of the mother and stuff, and then we just started talking about the episode in general, so it just kind of slipped my mind as well, but I was like... I mentally, before we started, thought we were going to pretty much start with that idea, and then it got lost in the shuffle. But yeah, it's definitely got that tone. So
absolutely.
The fact that the dagger says "Made in the Earth Kingdom" is a nod to how most modern day products have "Made in China" somewhere on them, as the Earth Kingdom is largely based on China, which is that makes sense. At the pond, Ursa explains to young Zuko, if you mess with a mother's babies, they're going to bite you back. This could potentially foreshadow, whatever it is she did. where this could potentially be this could potentially be a hint within the episode to what whatever action she took that got her vanished.
Yeah, no, very good point. Very good point.
And the final piece of trivia: the band UB40 is named after unemployment benefit form 40 because at the time they were unemployed, and that was a friend suggested they should be UB40 when they started the band.
Why are you giving UB40 facts in the Avatar trivia, Dan?
Trivia.
Huh?
It's just trivia.
Is that to test that I'm listening?
No. Although now you say it, that's genius.
We've made a few references to and I'll be honest, I ain't denying it. Sometimes switch off during the trip, and I just feel like you're like, right, fuck it, I'm going to slip in a UB40 trivia. But by the way,
it's just trivia, Chris. I don't know. What's the problem?
It's not even necessarily a band that American listeners will know.
Oh no, UB40 are UB40 are huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or they
Fair
were.
enough.
I mean, I don't know. I doubt it.
But they big in the States?
Yeah, I thought so, yeah. I thought they had number one singles out there and stuff.
I'll have a look. I'll have a little look while you, I don't know, try and explain yourself as to why you...
I have no explanation. It's trivia. I don't know. What's the problem?
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Right, hold on. Fuck me, UB40 have had a lot of albums.
Yeah.
They've had 20 studio albums, mate. Although they've had 20 studio albums and 17 compilation albums.
They have. Yeah, I know this because my dad I grew up with my dad was a big UB40 fan, and I know a lot of the tracks. I know a lot of those albums, and he always bought the compilation albums, even though he already had all the songs on the individual albums. He always succumbed to a new UB40 CD, regardless of the the need for it.
Right. To be fair, it looks like Red Wine. Well, according to this, that can't be the main.
Yeah, Red Wine's their biggest song
chart
by far, I'm sure.
No, it's not that. No, it's not that. It's the fact that basically, according to this, nothing charted at all in the US, and then Red Wine went to number one.
Right.
Which seems crazy.
That is surprising. I would have thought they'd had more number ones than that prior to that, but yeah, there you go.
Oh, no. Yeah, no, not prior, but then I Can't Help Falling in Love, which is obviously their Elvis cover. That also, according to this, went to number one in the US. So yeah, fair play. But I guess what surprised me was what I was saying it can't be is, I was like, that can't be the main Billboard chart, can it? Because usually in the US, you have to do the radio circuit, do the singles, and you see someone slowly climb up. If it's something like number one straight away, you're kind of like, oh, is it the Billboard indie chart? Do you know what I mean? Is it actually the main? But it seems to be. So fair play to them. I stand corrected, Dan.
Yeah, they've had a lot of number ones in the UK and New Zealand. They love them in New Zealand. Looking at this. I've just pulled it up. They've had so many number ones in New Zealand. Who knew? Well, there you go.
Anyway, there we go. So we got a listener question, Dan?
Yeah, we do have a listener question. So we're going back to our old friend Jackie, that Jackie one, who has asked us...
Jackie.
Who has asked us one of her brilliant this or that questions. And this is going to be another interesting one, because I don't think you've seen either of these shows. So this is going to be fun too. I always love catching up with two shows you've never... Because getting your opinion on two shows you have no knowledge of is always fun, because it's just like you scrambling for what you do know about them. So this is Pokemon or Digimon all over again. Chris, I ask you, this or that, Buffy or Charmed?
I've seen 2 episodes of the Charmed reboot, Dan. That's not... But I assume we're talking classic Charmed.
Yeah, I mean, I assume so. Around the same era. Well, Charmed was later than Buffy, but yeah.
You gotta, if you've not seen something,
yep,
I think you have to go to what's made the biggest impact
culturally,
and regardless of the creator and recent sort of revelations.
Sure.
And they, to us, bearing in mind we're recording this in May, in May 2021, God knows what else has come out since when this goes up. So if anything more horrific has come out, then, and it sounds like we're being casual, we're recording this in May. Not that,
although plenty of horrific things have already come out.
I was going to say, yeah, what's already come out is horrific, but you know what I mean.
Specifically regarding, name redacted, which is how I will be referring to him going forward.
Yes. So, regardless of that, and I think, we are talking specifically, what show.
Mm-hmm.
Buffy had such an impact on television, such an impact on people. I think I kind of have to say Buffy.
Mm.
Isn't it amazing that no one talks about, sorry to interrupt, no one, franchises are such a huge thing now, with you flipping, your CW verses on telly and your other verses on telly and your multimedia franchises and, MCU, different films, etc. No one really talks about the fact that, Buffy did that, before a lot of these things, Buffy, had the Angel spin-off and stuff, and other shows obviously had spin-offs, but a lot of those spin-offs, like Frasier and Cheers, Frasier aired after Cheers, whereas, Buffy and Angel were concurrent with each other and, doing the CW thing of crossover episodes and stuff like that. And nobody really talks about that. Name redacted and Kevin Smith were doing this in the 90s and people seem to just, ignore that fact. Maybe not so much Kevin Smith. Kevin Smith has a lot of Kevin Smith fans going, he was the MCU before, to which Kevin Smith's response is genius because he's always like, yeah, but I ripped it off from Marvel. So
Right, yeah, from the comics. Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, you gotta go Buffy.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, without Buffy, you don't get Charmed. I mean, Charmed, as good as Charmed was, and I do think Charmed is a fun show, Charmed doesn't exist without Buffy. Charmed is very much, I wouldn't want to call it like a clone, but it definitely took the basic structure of what was Buffy, which is very, very strong sort of female leads in a supernatural world, where every week they're getting into mischief, but then there's these overall season arcs that get more elaborate as the show goes on. I mean, that's Buffy. It's Charmed, but it's also Buffy. But so the DNA of Buffy is in Charmed, and without Buffy existing and succeeding, Charmed doesn't exist at all. So I mean, on that basis alone, you put Buffy first. But I would say, Charmed is a really fun show, and certainly found its own feet in the end. It may have started with sort of a lot more influences, from Buffy, but I do think it kind of found its own voice. So it's definitely in the conversation as as quite an iconic show from that era, and it's very, very beloved, obviously. Personally, if you said which one would sit down and rewatch now, Buffy. I was always I always preferred Buffy. I like the cast. The cast of both shows are good, but I really, really love the cast of Buffy. The dialogue in Buffy, which has always been Name Redacted's strongest suit. It's always been the thing he's the best at, and that's evident in the show we're actually watching for a review at the moment, The Nevers, for our other podcast, Nothing But Static, which I guess by the time this airs, you guys can go listen to if you want to hear. But yeah, 100%. It's got to be Buffy over Charmed for all those reasons.
I just looked up. The reboot of Charmed is still on. It's been renewed for a 4th series, and
it's got a huge following. It is beloved. There's no question about that. It's not, it's in the conversation, even if it did sort of start by taking the seed of what made Buffy work and building on that. There's nothing wrong with borrowing the foundations of another thing.
Oh God, no, absolutely not.
It just means though that kind of when you compare the two, by default, the original has to kind of win out because it got there first, and that's just one of those things. Cool.
There you go.
Yeah. And without Buffy, we don't end up getting that team together to write Firefly.
Yeah.
And that's that's where Name Redacted sort of came across the co-collaborators that would then work with him on many of his other projects. People such as Jane Espenson, David Greenwalt, Marty Knox, and a lot of big names that would eventually work their way up through and make other great things themselves.
Just a super quick, because conscious of time, but just a super quick side one, Dan.
Sure.
U2 or UB40?
U2.
It's got to be U2, isn't it?
I mean, first of all, just in success, you just pure, what do they say, like dollars and dimes or something like that. You know, just in pure numbers, the number of record sales and the amount of money made. It's got to be. It's just by default, but also just musically. Like for me, I respect what UB40 did, which is basically take a genre, reggae, and go, let's popify this, and we can be like the gateway to people discovering actual reggae music. You know, so they sort of. I always have a lot more time than a lot of people do for those sort of like, because people like, for example, like Jamie Cullum. A lot of people shit on Jamie Cullum because he's like pop jazz, and they go, well, that's not real jazz. I'm like, yeah, it's not real jazz, but a lot of people who, when they were younger, listened to Jamie Cullum, then found out who he was inspired by and the real true jazz artist, and got into jazz. I know, I don't know a lot of people, but I do know of people who got into jazz through Jamie Cullum, and I feel like a lot of people will have gotten into reggae through the sort of 70s and 80s UB40s heyday. Into reggae that way, and that's there's nothing wrong with stepping stone music, and there's also nothing wrong with pop music. It's popular for a reason. So yeah, but I do think U2 are superior musically for me. I'm not a big reggae guy. I'm not I'm not the guy that got into reggae through UB40. Although there is an element of, you always sort of rebel against what your parents like, don't you? And the fact that my dad, obsessively played. I don't think there's a UB40 track I wouldn't recognize unless it came off an album in the last sort of 5 or 10 years.
Jesus, wow!
Like that was
it
was
goes
all
two
we
ways,
ever heard.
It goes two ways, doesn't it? You either rebel like you and your dad and UB40, or you embrace like me and my dad and Queen. I'd say U2 as well. I think U2 get a lot of shit, but U2 are one of those bands. I think also, to be fair, like Coldplay, that get a lot of shit, but the same people that give them shit, you could cut to a football game or a night out, and they'd just be like, "It's a beautiful day." Yeah. Like, it's like, look, you can give the band shit, but you cannot deny the music. And like, Beautiful Day isn't even the best example. I'd go something like One, or do you know what I mean? Like, they've got some brilliant songs. Like, it's the same as I just love every single person in the world. Mr. Brightside's overplayed. Also, every single person in the world, when Mr. Brightside comes on, I'm going out of my cage and I've been doing just fine. Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
I just really agree. Yeah. And to anybody who came to this podcast for Avatar chat and that finished about 10 minutes ago, 15 minutes ago, I'm sorry.
It always does. Like, your constant amazement that you have added a segment to this podcast, and yet the end of this podcast ends with 10 minutes of irrelevant chat is like, is stunning.
I think we
me.
just need to be quicker with our answers to the question. That's what I think needs to start happening.
But we're not, like, the episodes before were about 40 minutes, 45 minutes. Now they're about an hour. Like, it's that extra 10 minutes of
chat. So
Chat.
I'm just saying, maybe let's make that 5 minutes. Answer the question and move on.
But like, by saying anyone that came for Avatar chat, no one's losing Avatar chat.
Because they either switch off at the question starting to be asked, or they listen.
Yeah, they're only gaining Buffy UB40 based chatter, which is the gift they didn't know they wanted. Nobody came into this podcast going, I hope Chris and Dan talk about UB40 and how many number ones they had in America. But there's at least 2 people that got a kick out of it. So,
at least, if you're one of those 2 people,
minimum. Minimum 2 people, a maximum 3. Like,
if you're one of those 2 people and you'd like to message us and say how much you enjoyed our UB40, U2, Buffy, Charmed sidetracks, then feel free to message us on Twitter. I'm at Dan Doolan. Chris is at C Billingham with 2 M's. You can also get us at mail at nothingbutstatic, or you can comment on the YouTube video, youtube.com/nothingbutstatic, or you can go on the Patreon and leave a comment there. If you'd like to ask a question like that Jackie one did, because she's one of our patrons, you can do so. How you would do it is you would go to patreon.com/nothingbutstatic and give us as little as $1 a month. You can get access to early episodes. I'm having to turn Chris down so I can concentrate on what I'm saying. You can listen to episodes a week early, and you get the ability to ask us a silly question and sidetrack us your very self. So if you'd like the sidetrack to be something you're actually interested in, that's how you do it. You also obviously get a little shout out, which is always fun. So yeah, I think I've covered all the admin. I've never done it so fast in my life, but mostly because I was just scared I was going to get lost in Chris's beautiful singing.
I'd have taken the opposite approach. I'd have taken the how many U2 songs can he sing off the cuff? I'd have slowed it down.
Stretch this out. Yeah, but I was genuinely worried that I was going to lose my ability to, say sentences, because it was extremely distracting.
We say those sentences every week. How often do I give a little U2 medley for the listeners?
Every comic might be someone's first comic, Chris. God, I hope this isn't someone's first episode of this podcast, because you called Zuko all episode, and I think that is immediately a reason to turn it off.
Sunday, bloody Sunday. I've had to go to Wikipedia now. I did run out.
I had a feeling.
That's the only I'll be honest with you, mate. That's the only reason I stopped.
Anyway, so thanks so much for you guys for listening. If you want to support us, there's all the ways I just mentioned. Obviously, you head over to the Patreon and what have you. I'm sure we're still suffering financially from the lack of monetization of last week's episode due to repeated references to drug use. So feel free to go.
This one's going to be taken down for copyright reasons. They'll be like, they get Bono on the podcast.
They'll be like, oh, they're playing the original U2 recordings, not acceptable. Yeah. We're gonna get copyright striked by whoever owns that music. They try to trick us by having one of the guys talk over it, but it is still our original song. We need that. So that's everything for this week. Thank you guys so much for listening. Of course, we always appreciate you guys taking the time to do that, especially if you've gotten this far in this piece of shit. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, no, good time had by all, I hope. And if not, well, sorry. This podcast ain't changing, that's for sure. Cool. Yeah, so thanks very much for listening, everyone. I've been Dan Doolan.
I've been Chris Billingham.
And we'll see you guys in a week's time when we sit down to discuss The Chase.
Your instinct was right, by the way. You two have had a lot more number ones than UB40.
Oh, yeah. I didn't think that would even be close. I thought it would be triple, maybe quadruple the number of number ones UB40 have had.
Yeah.
You two are, much bigger.
Despite 40 being literally 38 times bigger.
Yeah.
Such a shit
more
joke.
members of your band and more albums released does not apparently give you more number ones than you two.
Oh, I just meant numerically.
Oh, yeah, you went much simpler than that.
I
see.
Such a,
UB40. Yeah, okay. That's actually a clever joke that I gave it credit for.
When I laughed and went, that's such a shit joke. I mean, literally, it was a very poor joke.
I thought you were making a joke about the fact that UB40 as a band is quite large. Like, there's a lot.
Yeah, no, they are, aren't they? Yeah.
Right. And also, then I thought it was a reference to how many albums they've released, which is a lot.
Album-wise, though, so UB40 are on 20 albums. U2 are only on 14 studio albums.
That's what I'm saying. UB40 have released a lot more.
Yeah.
They churn them out.
We should stop.
We should stop.
Only 3 compilation albums, though, which is way more respectable.
Yeah, UB40 just re-churn out the old music every couple of years just to get a couple of quid in the old bank account. It works.
That's because your dad's still buying them.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure my dad is the only reason they're in business still.
Right, bye.
Bye.